Good afternoon. My name is Gad Lebanon, and I'm leading the Labor Market Institute here at the Conference Board. And welcome to a special webcast titled The Delayed Wage Crunch and Salary Increase Budgets. As you know, we are in a deep recession now, and typically in deep recessions or in any recessions, there are some significant changes to wages and compensation in general. So we are going to talk about that. Just to give you a little more information on the main questions that we'll discuss. So first, with a bit of a quick overview of the impact of COVID-19 on the US labor market so far. We called it the delayed wage crunch, and we'll explain why it is being delayed and why it may not be as visible yet. We'll talk about what companies and HR leaders are doing regarding wages and compensation. And in particular, in the Conference Board, we have the annual salary increase budget report, and we're about to release it, so we'll give you some sneak preview to some of the results there. We'll talk also about the next several years, about what could happen there. And also we'll talk about minimum wages and the potential impact of the continued increase in minimum wages on wages and other considerations. For those of you who are interested in earning credits, there are HRSCI, SHRM, and CPE credits. You need to type your full name, email address, and specify the type of credit you're looking for. And also there will be 3 pop-ups that you need to click OK on. The credit is available for participation in the live webcast only. I'm joined by 2 wonderful co-presenters today. First, from Campbell Soup, the Vice President of Total Rewards, Bob Santonze. I hope I pronounced your last name correctly.
You did well.
Hi, Bob. Welcome and thank you for joining us. And as usual, my colleague Frank Stimmer, economist at the Conference Board. Welcome, Frank.
Thanks, Gad.
Just a reminder that throughout the webcast, you're welcome to ask questions. There's no need to wait until then. You just type them on the bottom left part of your screen, and we'll try to take as many as we can during the presentation. So let's start with a bit of an overview of the labor market, because of course that is crucial for what will happen and what is happening to wages. So we are in probably the deepest recession since the Great Depression. The economy is recovering from the lows of April, but still in most industries we are well below a pre-pandemic level, but not in all. For example, one type of industry, while we spend much less on services, especially leisure-related services, we spend more on goods. So, for example, retail sales are already back to pre-pandemic level, even above. So there is a variation, but in general, on average, we're still well below. Unemployment rate is historically high, although it is also recovering. And you'd expect that in such a weak labor market, we will see a big wage crunch, but as we'll explain in a minute, the labor market is not as loose as the unemployment rate suggests. We are starting to see employers reacting and lowering the wages and salary increase budget, even in 2020, even though plans were already in the books. Because of the industries that are most affected, there are several demographic groups that are more impacted than others, young people, minorities, women to some degree, and in general, people more on the lower end of the educational and income distribution are harder hit, simply because they have a strong concentration of them in the industries that are hard hit. Because of the impact on young workers in particular, we expect this to see a larger wage adjustment for new labor market entrants. They always suffer more in a period of a recession, but this time, because, for example, food services are employing much fewer people, the young people who are very concentrated in such industries are suffering even more than usual. We're also going to talk about several actions that business leaders are taking. Bob will talk to us about the special situation of frontline workers who are in a higher risk of infection and how Campbell Soup is dealing with that. So yeah, a lot of things that we are going to cover here. Frank, maybe you start with giving us an overview of which industries are especially hard hit and which are already recovering.
Right. I think this can help to look at some of the industries for a good overview on how different industries have been impacted and which industries have maybe not been impacted at all or almost or not that much. But before I go into the different industries, let me explain a little bit about the chart and what we're exactly looking at, because it may be a little bit difficult to understand. So we're looking here at the percent change in the number of jobs from February to August, which is represented by this small gray bubble for each industry. Then what we have done, we have divided the job losses from February to April in one part, so that are the light gray bars, and then the recovery which started in April, we've captured that with the blue bars. So for example, at the top of the chart you see performing arts, spectator sports, that almost a 50% decline in employment from February to August. Almost everything happened between February and April, and as you can see with this very small blue part, there's almost been no recovery yet from April to August. So a similar picture for accommodations, amusement, gambling. There has been some more recovery. Air transportation, it even got worse after April. I think food services is a very interesting industry, one of the industries most at the risk, of course, of when this virus starts to spread again. They may need to close down. What is going to happen in the winter? Outdoor dining may not be that nice anymore. Of course, some other industries, I think manufacturing and construction. In normal recessions, we see actually that job losses are very large there. So far, the job losses are not that large yet, but over the coming months, maybe when demand pressures are going to kick in, we might see more job losses in these industries. Then maybe lastly, let me point out a little bit further down the list, we also have professional technical services, finance and insurance. Many of these workers can work from home, so we see there that they have been relatively less impacted by this crisis. So this is the picture by industry. If you don't have anything else to add there, Gerd, let me just go into this chart that you have just brought up for where we're looking at the unemployment rates by demographic group. We know, of course, that the pain is not equally spread. So we know the unemployment rate, it reached almost 15% in April. That's already come down to 8.4% right now. So that is what we're showing with the blue bars. That is the current unemployment rate compared to the dark gray bubble. That was the unemployment rate in February. But if we look, for example, by age, we see that those aged 16 to 24 have still a much higher unemployment rate and are much more impacted than their older peers, 25 and above. By education, you see that there are those with lower educational attainment that still have very high unemployment rates. Race and ethnicity, it was first actually the Hispanic population that had the highest unemployment rate. They've been rebounded quite a lot already since April. So now you see that are especially the black population and the Asian population that have still had a very high increase in their unemployment rate compared to February. Looking by gender, the differences between men and women are smaller than we see in the other groups. So let me maybe also emphasize here in understanding what is happening here in the current labor market will also help us a lot to understand what might happen to compensation trends and wage growth over the coming years. So with that, if we go to the next chart, Gab. So to dig a little bit deeper and to talk about the current state of the labor market, and Gab, you are going to talk more about it, that maybe even though the unemployment rate is now actually very high, the labor market might actually still be tight. So to understand that, let me spend a little bit of time on this chart. So what we have done here is we're showing the unemployment rate, so that is the line on top of these stacked bar charts, which has now come down to 8.4%. But if you look at the different types of unemployed people, you see that it are especially those on temporary layoff that have been driving the changes in the unemployment rate. You can of course be unemployed because you're a temporary layoff, you were permanently laid off, or you're unemployed for other reasons. So maybe entering the labor market, re-entering the labor market. And so far, if you look at the dark purple area, so these bars, you see that there has only been a very small increase so far, but it is now starting to grow. So what we're seeing is that a lot of people have so far been recalled back to work. But over the coming months, when we are going to have more bankruptcies and companies need to make more difficult changes, maybe restructurings, many of these furloughs may turn into permanent layoffs, and it then starts maybe to look more like we have seen in 2008, 2009, the Great Recession, when there were actually a lot of permanent layoffs and not that many furloughs anymore. So maybe this is a good bridge to you, Kat, to talk a little bit more about the current state of the labor market.
Yeah, and there is also a related question here that one of the attendees is asking that they are seeing actually increasing in entry-level wages in places like Amazon and Target, and what's causing this. So this may be related to one of the main points that we wanted to make, that even though we are having an historically high unemployment rate, the number of people who are actually seriously looking for a job is not or was not as large. And one of the reasons is what Frank explained in this chart, that many of the people are on temporary layoff, expecting to come back to their jobs, which may not happen. There are other reasons why people may shy away from looking for a job if they are afraid of getting infected, or if they are have childcare issues, so that prevents them from looking for a job. Another important factor that definitely was in place, I would say, through July, was the very generous unemployment benefits that made people perhaps consider whether they do want to go back to work, and in many cases earn less than when they were on unemployed and getting those very generous unemployment benefits. Bob, any thoughts on that point?
I think it's a two-edged sword. I think initially in March there was fear. People were very concerned about going into the workplace because of concerns about the virus. And again, depending on the industry that you're in, we're fortunate because we're in a very high demand product with shelf-stable food. We're producing at an all-time high. We're now in the fatigue factor. Our folks are really concerned about time off, coupled with very strict protocols that we have in place. As before people can enter a wage roll site, they are asked a series of questions, and we've been very conservative with the way they answer the questions, and we sent a lot of people home for self-imposed quarantines, which we've paid them for, within certain guidelines. And our fear is over time people started to game the system. They understand how to answer those questions, and instead of working in a hot factory, they're discovering that they could sit home for a couple of weeks. So we've been trying to mitigate that process.
Yeah, and it's probably more common across or very common across the entire economy. So let me show you some quantitative measures of this. So here the blue line is the unemployment rate. You see it reached historical highs. It recovered somewhat, but still very high. And the red line is the share of from the National Federation of Independent Business a monthly survey. They ask companies or who has few or no qualified applicants for job openings. And while there was a bit of a drop in this number in the red line, it didn't reach a very low level, suggesting that it's still not as easy to find qualified workers in this economy, despite the very high unemployment rate. Now, this is likely to change. I think a lot of people who are expecting to get back to their old jobs will figure out that those jobs are not waiting for them, and a lot of the people who relied on the generous unemployment benefits will also, they are no longer there. So we may see, or we probably are seeing more people going back into the labor market, seriously looking for a job. That will make it easier to find qualified workers, and perhaps will also result in the wage crunch that we typically see in a recession. So let's talk a little about compensation trends, but before we tell you what we think, let's put the first polling question and see what you think. So if the studio, yeah. So the first polling question is, did the COVID-19 pandemic increase the pressure to cut labor costs in your organization? And the answers are no, yes moderately, yes substantially. So let's give it a few more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's close the survey. Okay, so there is a clear majority that of companies that did feel the pressure to cut labor costs. About a quarter said that there is a substantial pressure. I guess that is very much depending on the industry. Any Frank or Bob, any reactions to are you surprised by any of the results here, or more or less what you had in mind?
I think it varies broadly based upon industry. We've seen cases where the smaller businesses and the service industries have been hit very hard. And again, the type of manufacturing firms really depending upon the products and demand over the time frame.
Yeah. So yeah, let me maybe add to that. It looks similar to other surveys that we have fielded ourselves or that we are seeing. We see that companies are you can take a lot of different steps to cut your labor costs. So you can think about furloughs, but also directly related to compensation, maybe deferring some pay increases. So I think it looks, yeah, it doesn't look very surprising to me. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There was also a question here about whether the fact that schools are not in session in person, is that going to impact the unemployment rate, maybe more for women than for men? I mean, we did see big job losses in the education sector in general, and also a lot of state and local governments are having a budget crisis, and they are the ones that fund most of the elementary and high schools and middle schools. So it probably is a factor in the unemployment rate. Not already, but probably more going forward. Okay, let's go back to the so Frank, what are we already seeing when it comes to wage growth?
Yeah, and so what we already see in what is happening to wages, and I think it's a good transition from the poll question. What we're looking at here is the National Federation of Independent Businesses, and they ask businesses, have you been raising your worker compensation over the past 3 months? So we can clearly see that there was a big drop after February, so far not really a pickup. So I think that is yeah, very similar to what we have just seen in this poll question, that quite a lot of businesses are already addressing raising worker compensations and seeing that there's not that much room left. I think looking maybe a little bit ahead in the Great Recession, 2008 and 2009, you see that was actually this line reached zero. So maybe this line will even drop further, but it is, of course, we know in this pandemic crisis, it's very difficult to forecast what will happen, but I think we may be seeing a further trend downwards, especially if some industries are continuing to be in trouble.
Yeah. And Frank, before the recession, we saw a very different trend for the highly educated white-collar jobs and the other jobs. So what was the trend and what is likely to happen in the future in that context?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, Gerd. So before this crisis, we were always talking about labor shortages. And one of our main topics was labor shortages for blue-collar and manual services occupations. So we looked often at this chart, which is wage growth, but then grouped into the red line, so the management and professional occupations, so that are those that generally have a BA or higher, and the blue line chart, which is all other occupations for which you generally do not need a BA, so that they're mostly like blue-collar manual services workers. Very strong wage growth, so it was very unfortunate that this crisis happened, because especially these workers were benefiting from this tight labor market. But now we see, and I refer now back to the introduction that we were giving on the state of the US labor market, these workers are now impacted much more than the management and professional workers who can continue doing the work from home, where many blue-collar manual services workers cannot do so. So what we expect is going to happen over the next couple of years, and that is what we represent with these bubbles. For both groups, wage growth will likely go down because both groups will get a looser labor market, but it will likely, the management and professional workers will likely be less impacted than the group of other workers.
Thanks, Frank. Bob, so the way to change labor cost at the company or average wages is that you can either impact or adjust wages for existing workers, or you can change the offers that you will give to future hires, future new hires. So as someone who has been in the area of compensation for many years, when you kind of enter a period of a weak labor market like we're seeing now, what are some of the considerations of how you kind of treat existing workers versus new hires?
It's a complex issue, and a lot of it, as an attorney, it depends on your industry. It also depends on the region and sort of the labor market, how tight it is, and where you operate. Ideally, you would rather deal with the new entrants coming in differently than your existing workforce. So we use this concept of new wave employees coming in with a different deal than the existing employees, and we've seen this for years with closed pension plans. Right, and with the advent of 401k as a retirement vehicle. Absent that, though, if you're really in an economic crunch and you're really struck with, I've got to reduce costs, then you do what you need to do to reduce your wage rates. The problem that you have is it creates this dynamic. Once the recession is over and you come back to a normal state, again, depending on where you operate in the region where you are located and the degree of competition that you have for labor market workers, it may be very difficult for you to climb out of that hole and to come back and get your rates competitive. I look back to 2008, 2009 when we had the last recession, and we look at salaries at that point. We were sort of on an average of 3.5%, 4%, 5% as an annual merit adjustment, and then after 2009, it's been a flat 3% for the last 11 years. So it's almost like this correction in rates as you go forward. So it'll be very interesting to me to see, what the outcome is and how long this pandemic situation lasts in this situation.
Yeah, well, we're all gonna follow it. But one prediction that I think is pretty safe to make is based on this chart. So what we see here is the wages, the wage growth for the blue line is for people aged 16 to 24. versus the red line, which is 25 and above. So a lot of the 16 to 24 are new hires or new entrants to the labor market, whereas most of the people 25 and above are existing workers. And you see typically that the blue line is much more volatile than the red line. It tends to go up more in good periods of labor market, and following recessions, when the labor markets are weak, they tend to drop more. And we see that after the Great Recession at around 2010, we actually see negative growth rates for people aged 16 to 24. And I think it's I'm pretty confident in saying that we will see this trend again. As Frank said before, everyone is going to see almost slower wage growth, but new labor market entrants are probably going to see a bigger adjustment to their wages. It's time for our second poll question, so let's put that. It's about what your organization already did or about to do. Did the COVID-19 pandemic impact your organization's average annual salary increase in this year, so in 2020? Yes, significantly decreased. Yes, moderately decreased. No change. Yes, moderately increased. Yes, significantly increased. So we are seeing we'll give you a little more time now. There's a little more to process and think. But let's close it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yeah. Okay, so not surprisingly, very few actually increased their average raises, which is to be expected in such a time. About half either moderately reduced it or significantly decreased it, whereas about 43% said no change. Any reactions, Bob, Frank?
Within our peer group, this is pretty consistent, and what we found were industries that were on a fiscal year basis, making decisions in the near term, were more likely to stay the course. Firms that were on a calendar year basis, where their increases would be effective perhaps after the first of the year, were really strongly thinking about cutting back or postponing because there was a lot of uncertainty ahead.
Yeah. Frank, any thoughts?
Well, of course, in the next slide you will discuss our actual survey results, but I think what I see, and also some of the comments, for example, David is mentioning that they're still uncertain and that it is not determined until next quarter, and that is also something that we have been hearing from, that we have heard from our members and also from our own survey. It's very difficult to foresee what's going to happen, so the decisions on salary increase budgets are also going to be pushed further up, waiting for more information.
Yeah, and as we're going to talk about it in a minute, but a lot of the responses that we got in our salary increase budget that simply don't know yet, so some of those decisions will be taken later. Okay, let's go back to the slides. So we have an annual survey, we call it the salary increase budget survey, where we ask about the salary increase budgets, but we also ask about the salary structure. So that's, for those who don't know, there are in many companies there are salary structures with a minimum, maximum, and midpoint for various groups of workers, and companies periodically adjust those bands. But when we asked in 2020, it seemed like nobody really adjusted or had the time to adjust the bands or the salary increase, salary structure. But they did have a time for some of those to adjust the actual salary increase budget. We see here that there has been a drop of about a little less than half a percentage point. Again, many of those companies that responded, the salary increase budget was already in the books when COVID hit. So many of them did not adjust it yet, but some did. More for executives than for others. Bob, as someone who deals with it on a regular basis, how do you think companies think about the salary increase budget and also what we've seen before, the salary structure in a time of kind of unexpected deterioration in the labor market?
I think there's probably two camps. There's the camp where their business is very depressed and they're doing what they need to do to essentially stay in business. And then there's companies like Campbell where we've been actually very fortunate with high demand products, good results. As we look at the incentive plans paying out very well, we made the point with our management team and the board that a very small percentage of our population actually participates in an incentive plan, so that the annual salary budget was an important way of, if you would, sharing the success with the rest of the organization. So that was the argument that we used to support our annual budget and proceed with the business as usual process at this point.
Mm-hmm. Bob, how important do you think is inflation for both the salary increase budget and the salary structure? Like the fact that we are in a prolonged period of low inflation and less need to compensate for an increase in cost of living. Do you think it's a big factor here?
We tend to look more around our market data as opposed to specific inflationary trends. So if you're in a hot job market, trying to compete right for entry-level folks or even experienced new hires, that's really what we use to help support our structures as we make our recommendations going forward. I think if you feel like your wage roll employees a little bit differently than you would your salaried professionals. I think that's the big delta as we look at that.
Okay. Good. So we are now going to hear more from Bob about some of the things that Campbell Soup is doing, and I just, I see this picture, and I just want to tell you, Bob, that I'm a big fan of your beef and vegetable soup. So keep up the good work.
We appreciate that. Thank you. Hey, just a real quick update on Campbell for those of you who don't know us as well. We're primarily, as of last year, a North American company. We had been a global company with operations in Europe and Australia with Arnott's Bakery, but we went through a restructuring and we decided last year to divest most of our non-U.S. businesses. So we're really focused on North America. We have two divisions that are equal in size, Campbell Snacks and Meals and Beverage, and we're a leading category in most of our businesses. Quick graphic on our organization. When you think of meals and beverages, think soup, salsa, Prego Italian sauce. Snacks, Pepperidge Farm, Milano's, Goldfish, and then recently Snyder's-Lance, the snacking business that we purchased. So $8 billion operation, largely split through the middle. When COVID hit, we were at a very interesting crossroads as an organization. We had plans in place, and we actually had, on our fiscal year, we were doing quite well. We were above our plan as we look at the first 6 months of our fiscal. Come mid-March, everything changed, right, in terms of how we focus on the business and what was happening. Normally for our business, and I'm speaking primarily the meals and simple beverage business, March through the end of the summer is a time where we're planning inventory and we're building up for what we call the soup season that would begin in the fall and take us through the middle of the winter time. With the COVID situation, our plants quickly went into high gear. Production around the clock, and initially we had people loading their pantries because they were uncertain whether or not things are going to stay on the shelves. As we got through the May-June timeframe, that really translated into consumption, and we were pleased as a business because we felt like many consumers not only were buying and consuming our products, but we believe in the long run we've actually reintroduced ourselves to new consumers. So our challenge has been keeping up with demand, making sure we're supplying our customers appropriately. So from a demand perspective, right, we haven't had the issue of furloughs, reducing pay. It's been more, how do we attract people? How do we keep them focused on things that need to happen? Very fortunate, everyone who works in the office has been able to work from home. People largely, and when you remove this issue around pay, right, it's almost like Maslow's hierarchy, compensation becomes sort of a lower rung issue. It's more about flexibility and do I have the tools and equipment to do my job. More questions about, can I buy a monitor? Can I get that extra mouse, right? Can I have more ergonomic chairs as we kind of go through that piece? So a lot of work in educating people around how to set up your office. That quickly turned into how do we think about mental health. I miss seeing people. I miss being in the office and working with folks. We reintroduced lots of technology. We did a very fast refocus of Microsoft Teams, did a launch. So right now we're on calls, and again, many of you on this call, same experience, right? You're probably speaking to your computer screen about 8 or 9 hours a day with your group meetings, helping people get adjusted to that, learning how to use the technology, and sharing your screen. So from a highlight perspective, record year, record bonus, right? So our fiscal year bonus just got approved. We're paying that out for the first time ever at that high run. Flexible things like, a couple of missteps. We used to have a Summer Fridays program where you could work a few extra hours during the week and take off a half a day on Friday. We decided, since you have ultimate flexibility, working from home 24/7, really didn't need that. And that was probably a mistake. If we had to do it over again, we probably would make you on that piece. People really are looking for removing the barriers from their day so that they can actually turn the computer off and get to work, right, and get on with their lives as they go through that piece. Our biggest issues right now, homeschooling children, right? Schools aren't open. How do parents with children manage through the day? And we've got business leaders that are maybe set in their ways, would really prefer to have people in the office. We have very strict protocols in place. So over our 14,000 employee base, we have only 300 cases of positive COVID tests, largely at the sites, and that's due to the screening and the protocols that we have in place to keep people safe. So, we're the other end of the spectrum, from a company perspective. Record earnings, doing very well. Our big issue, frankly, is we start now set goals for the new year, and those goals are lower than where we ended last year because no one's forecasting COVID to last forever. We don't know when it's going to end. That puts a lot of pressure on your compensation systems because if you're looking for an approval of a new bonus program and your goals are lower than last year, you're going to get some scrutiny from the board as well as the external investors. So those are some of the issues right now that we're working through.
Thanks, Bob. You mentioned the issue of parents with school-aged children. I mean, this is a huge issue for many companies. What could be done, especially from like the compensation side, but also from in general?
What we've done is provided lots of resources. The things that we've had in place that people have never dealt with before, like the employee assistance program, it's more than just a mental health provider. They're really there to help people with almost like a life coach, just another set of ears to respond and help with issues. We have on-site daycare, but that's helpful to a point because office isn't open, so therefore the daycare isn't open. I think the big thing that we had educator managers about is flexibility. When do people really need to have core hours? Is it okay for someone to say, hey, I need to maybe do some work and do some drafting in the evening so I could spend the time with my children to kind of get them set for their school day and get them set up? And I think, again, we've got two groups of employees. You can't do that at a plant site. People have to be on the line to produce the products. In the office, a lot more flexibility where people can take advantage of that. And that's sort of, there's a feeling of have and have-nots when you talk within our organization because lots of stress at the wage roll sites because people feel like, great, you guys are getting big bonuses on our backs because we're the ones making the product and producing everything. So it's been a very delicate line that we've had to walk.
Right. No, that's very interesting. One last question about the remote situation. I'm assuming that some of your office workers are kind of are hourly workers or non-exempt, and there in the past some companies were kind of not very excited about letting those hourly workers work from home because it's harder to monitor their hours and things like that. But due to COVID, for a while at least, everyone had to work from home. So, what are your how did Campbell Soup deal with that issue, or what do you think? How can you remove those barriers from letting those people work from home?
I think overnight things changed. The idea of, hey, I'm working from home, we kind of took the air quotes out of that, because what we're finding is people are really spending the time doing what they need to do. Yes, some people are busier than others depending on the type of work that they do, but for the most part, we have not seen a drop in productivity. And it's been, I think, a big eye-opener for us as we think about flexible work practices going into the future. And I can say that my belief is over time, while we'll have a core of people that will come back once this is all over, I think this notion of where I work is not going to be as big of a hurdle as it was before. And let me give you two examples. At the beginning of this crisis, we hired a new president of our snacks division. She's located in San Francisco. She came out and spent the first week of her employment meeting with our teams in Charlotte, Norwalk, and Camden, New Jersey, came back home, and then has been working from San Francisco ever since, leading that group. So I think that alone has been a great example for us of, yeah, you can do this. You don't have to have to FaceTime and sit next door to somebody.
Right. Very interesting. We also, so in the context of the actually cutting salaries, we asked the question as part of the salary increase budget, has your organization implemented pay cuts as cost-cutting measure in response to COVID-19 in any of the following employment categories? So we've seen in general quite a few, but it was much more frequent among executives, 23% versus 16% for exempt versus only 12% for non-exempt and hourly. And Frank, we also, it's been an older survey, but we asked some more questions about wages and bonuses.
Right, so we asked in the second half of April what companies were doing, what actions they were taking to reduce their workforce costs. And we also asked about three actions related or directly related to compensation. So were they deferring pay increases or bonuses? Were they already cutting bonuses or cutting even salary and wages? So we saw that already in April, many companies were doing this, but many were expected to do so over the next 3 months, at that point, May to July. So about 40% was either already had deferred pay increases or was thinking of it. 30% were cutting bonuses and 20% were cutting salaries and wages. As you were mentioning, Gerd, this is of course now a little outdated. So that's why we actually fielded a new survey, which is now open, or we have just opened it this week. So if anybody on this call can take that survey, that would be extremely helpful to us. And I think we have a slide on that at the end of this presentation, and Gerd, you will probably remind them again, and that would be a great help to us and to do further research on these very important topics.
Yes, I will remind everyone because this was a very important survey, and we want to hear what changed since the spring. Bob, we're going to go back to Campbell Soup because you had a large part of your workforce are frontline employees in factories and other places. So how did you, Campbell Soup, deal with the situation of compensating and protecting frontline workers?
So from a perspective, we have 18,000 employees across the U.S. 14,000 are frontline workers that work in production facilities. So we only have 4,000 salaried employees across the organization. This was a huge issue from day one, and there really were essentially two cycles that we looked at. First, early in March, as COVID started to spread, we were very concerned about making sure that plant sites were safe. We set up very specific protocols, temperature checks, questions and answers. If individuals indicated that they were near somebody or had symptoms, we really wanted to make sure that they were sent home and they were quarantined. That opened up a whole bunch of questions around how do you protect their pay in those situations. We ended up with essentially 3 criteria. How do we pay people if they actually have COVID, and we would bridge them the 7 days it would take them to get to short-term disability? What if they were fine, but we sent them home, right? So we forced them to go into a quarantine situation. We guaranteed them 14 days of pay, which was consistent with the time frame for the quarantine, and if they were fine, they could come back. And then there were people who just self-selected. They weren't comfortable coming back for a number of reasons. And we were very flexible in the beginning with that. If it was a child care issue or an elder care issue, or hey, I just feel uncomfortable. What we said in that case was, take PTO. If you exhaust your PTO, then we'll give you an additional bank of 40 hours, which could replenish to kind of help you work that through. That seemed to get us over the hump. After about the first 2 months of COVID, it became very apparent that the shift work and the production schedules were just increasingly tough. And we needed another incentive just to keep people from calling out because they were tired or they were very concerned about coming in to be infected. And we took the position that coming into a Campbell plant site was fairly safe compared to a retail store or a restaurant, given that it was a very controlled environment. We had the protocols in place. We had masks required, all the safety equipment. We started talking about premium pay, and we elected to provide a $2 per hour premium to all of our frontline workers. And for the frontline supervisors who were not incentive eligible, they received a bonus of $100 per week. We started as an initial 5-week program. We renewed it every 2 weeks until we got to week 18. So this went largely from March until the end of July. It worked fairly well. Our absenteeism was still fairly high. And we looked at absenteeism from 2 perspectives. I'm really ill, or I just called out, right? And we're kind of working through that piece. So we were one of the last companies in our peer group to shut down the premium pay. Things are starting to open up, and it frankly became an affordability issue as well, because while we were producing and selling lots of product, ingredients costs were high, labor cost was high. We actually were hiring. We hired over 1,000 additional plant employees during this time frame, just to make sure that we had the absenteeism covered and that we had enough production people in the facilities to cover the shifts. We're looking now at perhaps a signing bonus program, because in some of our regions we're competing against the likes of Amazon and in other locations where they're more warehouse type work as compared to a hot production facility. And we're finding we have to match some of those programs in order for the labor pool, A, to be attracted towards our openings, or even to retain some of the people that we have in place.
Very interesting, and that's hopefully our attendees, who many of them are also in companies that have a lot of frontline workers, can get some good insights from your experience. So thanks, Bob. I want to talk about one of the main expectations that we have or forecast about the future wage growth. So as we discussed earlier, we expect wages for people at the lower end of the income distribution to have a slower wage growth than those at the higher end, and that would be a turning point in terms of wage inequality. What we see in this chart is the blue line is the ratio between the 90th percentile and the 10th wage percentile. And the red line is the ratio between the 75th and the 25th percentile. So, for several decades until like around 2014, 2013, we had an increasing wage inequality because the people at the higher end were seeing a faster wage growth. That reversed itself as we entered the period of a tighter labor market, and then we saw actually faster wage growth at the lower end than at the higher end. And for the first time in many years, we saw a significant period of a shrinking wage inequality. But this is something we expect now to reverse back to an increase, because for at least several years we will probably see a looser labor market for people, blue-collar manual services people at the lower end, because that's where most of the job losses took place. In that context, I should also mention another important trend in terms of wages, and that's the minimum wage. So many businesses are hiring and employing workers who are close to or at the minimum wage. So they are very impacted by that. And despite the COVID, there were already a lot of minimum wage hikes in the books. And in 2020, you see those states that had an increase in their minimum wage, sometimes a significant increase. And this is in this map, you see the actual minimum wage by state. So you see large variation, and sometimes in states that are right next to each other. So, for example, Washington, minimum wage of 13.5 versus Idaho, which is right across the border at 7.25. California versus Nevada, also a big gap. New York versus Pennsylvania, also a big gap. So now there's a very interesting discussion both among economists and elsewhere about the impact of minimum wages. In the past, I think most research finds that there wasn't a big impact, but of a big impact of increase in minimum wage. But this time may be different. First of all, it's one thing to raise minimum wages when market wages are also going up fast, like we had in recent years. But it's another thing to raise minimum wages when market wages are perhaps even going down. So we may see a bigger impact here. First, maybe companies will have a stronger incentive to automate some of those jobs that are around the minimum wage. And perhaps there will be even an impact on location if you now need to expand or open a new operation and you see such a big gap between two states that are right next to each other. That may impact your decision of where to start a new plant or a new operation. So we may see some shift to states with a lower minimum wage in the coming years. So I wanted to remind people again, Frank mentioned it earlier, some of the information here and information about other stuff comes from our surveys, and we have a survey, the impact of COVID-19 on recruitment, retention, and human capital practices. And there is in the slide you can there's a link that will take you there. There's a few questions there about remote work, which is probably the biggest legacy in terms of work. The biggest legacy of COVID-19 is likely to be the shift to remote work. So there are some questions there. So we strongly encourage you to participate in this survey. We also have a lot of other material related to compensation. This is in this slide. You see a lot of links to, especially material from our human capital research team that they do a lot of work on compensation. So we encourage you to go there. And there are a few other events and webcasts that you may want to see on this topic and others. We have a very rich and frequently updated list of webcasts. So those are some examples of webcasts that you can go to. And also we have a resource page for COVID, so everything COVID related, you're very welcome to do that. There are a couple of questions that I just wanted to answer before we leave. One is, everything that we showed you here, data related, is purely US. There are some different trends elsewhere, which we'll perhaps cover in another webcast. The survey, there's a question, when will the results of the survey be available? It's being fielded now, and we are aiming to publish a report with that towards the end of October.
Maybe also the salary budget increase survey and our report, which is also going to be published relatively soon.
So a lot of what we talked about today will be in our wage report that also covers the salary increase budget, and that will be out probably in the next couple of weeks. So we encourage you to, or if you're interested, there is what we talked about, but a lot more in this report. So I want to thank Bob and Frank for joining me today. It was a pleasure. I thank you for your insights. And I want to thank everyone who attended the webcast today, and wish you a happy and great weekend ahead. So have a good rest of the day.